that's something like 20 times the size of Manhattan. How do you, in the village of Itate, where they were told to evacuate about 6 weeks after the accident, these businessmen, we had a reporter there, and he said they would say, well, wait, I'm going to lose my business that I spent a lifetime developing. How do I start this? So how do you calculate all those costs? And frankly, I think they should be some guess at it and put that into your per kilowatt hour calculations. And, spread it over 440 reactors in the world, except that when you do have an accident like that, it's the country that has it that has to pay it. So
I would just like to stress, please don't just stop at the dollar figures, because the psychology of people are losing everything.
Yeah, you can't cost that. Or people that grow up. I've met people from Ukraine who are in their 20s now that were 2 at the time. I said, I know that I always have a risk. I just live with that like it's a shadow over them their whole lives. I don't know how you calculate that. Yes?
With all the dangers associated with nuclear, particularly with this and 3 Mile Island, what's the driving reason for wanting to use nuclear? More accurately, what's an alternative?
Well, the driving reason for wanting to use nuclear, it's depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to somebody at Westinghouse, it's business. For other people, they say it's a way to lower carbon emissions. I think that the carbon emissions argument is slightly bogus, because the real carbon emissions problem comes from cars and not from electric, to some extent, yeah, but you would have to build so many nuclear power plants to make a footprint, to make a dent in that it's really not going to do. I mean, Robert Sokolow did this carbon footprint pie with his colleague, I can't think of his name right now, but anyway, they came out with this thing that you would have to have something like 700 new plants to make a dent in the carbon emissions. But the alternatives, and we haven't even begun to we're at the baby stages now of solar, wind, storage, smart grid stuff, conservation. I mean, here in Atlanta, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, because it's your hometown. But here you guys are the focal point of the Renaissance. The only action in the United States is in your backyard, I'm sorry to say, and at Vogtle. And then there's, VC Summer second. But by the way, after Fukushima, NRG pulled out of the South Texas project, which wasn't totally surprising. But the alternatives are things that we haven't spent a lot of money investigating relative to what we've spent on nuclear. And I say it's time to flip the spending priorities on energy R&D in this country and focus them on grids. And by the way, money is going under this loan guarantee program. Money is going for stuff like, flywheel technology to store energy. And really interesting stuff. And I'm hopeful. I think it can happen. And I'm hoping Japan and Germany will help lead the way, because the Prime Minister in Japan has talked about that. Whether it'll happen or not, I don't know, but he's certainly talked about it. I think right now, frankly, in Japan, I don't think they have a choice, because no matter how powerful Tokyo is and the nuclear establishment, they still have to go to local prefecture governments to get approvals for reactors to run, or even to restart after an earthquake. Now, I'm sure lots of money passes hands and they get approvals that way, but right now it would be political suicide to approve a new plant. So, we'll see. We'll watch what happens. But I think in the United States we have an abundant country, we have smart people, and we haven't even, scratched the surface of the possibilities of putting solar on everybody's rooftops and on garages and on office buildings. And if it's a little more expensive to begin with, I say, so what? It's safer.
I wanted to respond to that exact point. Vogtle, which was initially thought to cost, I think it was 750, 800 million, came online at 8.7 billion.
Yeah, we just heard that figure.
The current estimates that I keep reading are that a new plant of that size would be 15 to 20 billion.
Yeah.
Vogtle produces 1/440th of the electricity in the United States.
Yeah.
It can produce the electricity that 700,000 people need. To completely nuclearize, Georgia would require 15 plants the size of Vogtle at maybe 20 billion apiece.
Right.
So you're talking 300 billion to nuclearize.
That's a
Georgia
lot of
with
solar
its-
panels.
Okay, take that figure, 300 billion, and divide it by all the buildings
Yeah.
and inhabitants. That's $30,000 per inhabitant in the state of Georgia.
It's an interesting thing.
Now, think about this. Most dwelling units have, what, 2, 3 people in them? Some 4,
Yeah.
some whatever, average 2.5 to 3. That's $90,000 a dwelling unit. Now, if anybody who thinks that nuclear energy is a good choice for one plant must think it's a good choice for every plant.
Right.
Well, to replace all of the electrical generation in the United States, including most of the nuclear plants, which are so old
Yeah.
that they most need to be replaced, would cost something in the range of $9 to $10 trillion. Now, last time I checked, that's close to the national debt of the United States. Not quite, but
Thank you for this great math.
well, just think about it. I mean, a plant the size of Vogtle, a full-size nuclear power plant, can only cover 700, 800, 900,000 people.
Yeah.
So we're in the United States, and as you mentioned, so importantly, the only way this industry can stand on its own, which it can, is with us guys paying. for
Yeah,
the
quick.
cost. And
Yeah.
who knows, and not only that, we're paying for the cost of the 60 commissioned plants in the United States. It's costing U.S. taxpayers, I think it was $8, $9, or $10 billion a year to store the spent fuel rods in these concrete caissons at the 60 commissioned plants.
Yeah.
Out of the 110 that there were, now there are 104 in operation, many of which are very old. So just on the basis of cost, it's an absolute, complete, disastrous, idiotic idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anybody who
Okay,
can't
let's
understand
get to a
science-
question.
The question is, that is something that I hope all of us will tell everybody that we know, that the cost of generation is $30,000 a resident.
Right. Thank you. I think that's great. Yeah, thank you. Yep.
I'd like to continue what this gentleman has started. There is a study by Mark C. Jacobson at Stanford University to do globally all of the energy that we need from wind, sun, and water with geothermal and energy efficiency, and to produce enough hydrogen to run the whole transportation system of the world.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen a price on it, but this study is in the Journal of Energy Policy in January, and it can be done.
Okay,
It can be done.
we've got a great opportunity with Stephanie that we're not going to have sometime else, so let's keep it to questions for Stephanie. Okay?
I want to ask, what do you think about that?
I'm all for it. Yeah.
The environmental impact statements that each one of these new plants are going to have to produce, are they as vague and sketchy as they have historically been, or is there a new renaissance in attitude about what do they really need in an environmental impact? Do they need to have single or multiple disasters? Are they considering terrorists as a natural disaster or a political disaster?
They do consider terrorist attacks now, but you know, the whole, we haven't had our derivative scandal yet, which would be a really bad accident. But just like the financial industry became deregulated, well, so is the nuclear industry. And that was a lot to do with what Pete Domenici did in the 90s. He threatened the NRC with lower funding. And you know, the way the whole licensing proceeds now is just it's a one-stop shop, construction and operating license in one stop. It used to be you'd get your construction license and you'd have to come back when it was finished. And that gave interveners time and the public time to consider safety issues. So the environmental impact statement, I haven't looked at one lately, but I would imagine it doesn't cover everything. You know, for one thing, what about evacuation? I mean, what about the 50-mile evacuation zone? Go ahead. You were going to ask them.
You've alluded to the financial
Yeah.
impetus for the decisions that have been made. And I'm enough of a cynic with 2 graduate degrees from a business school to imagine a board sitting in a room somewhere saying, well, if we can control the source of the energy and pipe it out through our lines, we can charge for it.
Yeah.
Whereas if every house, garage, et cetera, has a solar panel on top, we're out of business.
Well,
Is there any real evidence? or am I just being-
No, I think they are worried, but I think they're being short-sighted, because if they were smart, they'd be proactive and get out there and be part of it, rather than, because they could be the people controlling the flow of juice from one house where there's excess, and just operating the whole thing. I mean, I'm not like so anti-utility that I wouldn't see them as part of the solution, and if they were, as I say, what do they care? They just need a source of electricity, but I'm not saying don't run the grid. You can run the grid, but just run it in a different way, and don't put nuclear plants at one end of it,
Can you talk about the limitations of the latest generation of nuclear plants?
Limitations? Well, we were talking about this today. The Westinghouse shield building apparently they've replaced the containment, which is this thing that surrounds the reactor pressure vessel, and is supposed to contain any radioactive release in the event of a meltdown, which we've seen that didn't happen at Fukushima. They apparently don't have a top to them, or there is a leakage, and I think it might have to do with the fact that they now have this 3 days water supply that can drop down into the reactor, which they're claiming is this big, great passive safety feature. But 3 days of water would not have been enough at Fukushima. The other thing that David Lockbaum, who knows a lot more about this than I do, who's a former reactor operator, says that basically, because they put in all these passive safety features, they've taken out stuff to mitigate an accident if an accident happens. So he doesn't think they're any safer than the previous generation. And by the way, what's running now, and you hear this from people in the industry, or I hear it secondhand from people that are in the industry that talk to other people, that they might not say this to me, but they talk to people they trust who then tell me that they say it's like an old car. These old reactors, they're like old cars, they need repairs all the time. And the utilities view them, and especially the merchant generators, they view them as cash cows. They just want to kick those things up till they, just keep, they're just, because they've been paid off now. But they want to put minimal amount of work into them. And now they're dangerous because they're older. Yes?
Ma'am, have you sat across the table and actually looked into the face of one of the actors to try to convey what state of mind is in that head?
In my head or their head?
Theirs.
Oh.
Any one person, any actor.
I have never sat, you mean person to person? Yeah, I have once. In England, I was at the Sellafield reprocessing plant, and this guy was trying to give me the big snow job about what a wonderful place it was. And in England, they set you up in this, it looks like something out of Jane Austen, a beautiful old guest house. And then, it's so weird. You walk down to this little river, and it's so beautiful. And I thought, I just want to stay here. And across is this awful monstrosity it's like their Savannah River. It's disgusting. And anyway, I said to him, Roger, after we'd had a little wine, and I said, all right, now just tell me the truth. You can't really like nuclear power. I know what a mess you're sitting on here. This is a mess. It's like Savannah River. And I said, and he'd had quite a bit of wine to drink. So I said, so what would you, I said, so what do you really, I assumed, I said, so what would you really like to see? He said, I don't know, I'm really big into tidal wave. So right there, I knew it. He didn't really like nuclear. He was waiting for his pension. So a lot of these guys they're just doing a job, and they're waiting to get their pensions.
Is wine necessary to get the truth?
Yeah, definitely. It helps. It definitely helps.
During the most critical hours or days at Fukushima, the wind was blowing east out to sea. Have you heard of studies or estimates of if the wind happened to be blowing in?
Yeah, well, there is now.
What would it be?
If you look on the International Atomic Energy Agency website, there's a map of the plume, and it's it's kind of shaped like like an upside down carrot. Yeah, and it goes out northwest of the plant, and that's the area that's probably going to be uninhabitable. Yeah.
So you've got both
public and private sources of capital that are necessary to fund